Thank you for attending KBOO's Introduction to Audio Editing class today. We're going to start off this class with a quick presentation covering some basic radio terminology, just to make sure we're all speaking the same language when we're working in our audio editing workspace. We'll be using Audacity since it's a free open source software that is accessible to anyone producing from home. The term broadcast means for something to actually be transmitted over the air. The term announcing more specifically refers to someone speaking over the air. Back announcing is when a host announces what was previously played on the air. That could be a recorded interview, it could be a song. For example, you play a CD, when you return from your music break, you can get back on the air, turn on your anchor mic and say, "That was Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen." Naturally, forward announcing is when you announce what you are about to play. However, the term back announcing is usually used to encompass both forward and back announcing. So in general, back announcing can mean announcing what you are about to or what you previously played. Dead air is when nothing is being played on the air. This can be caused by a malfunction or human error. We never want dead air. The host is the person who is running the show. This may not always be the same person as the engineer. The host is the person who is talking on the air. The engineer is the person who runs the soundboard. They make sure that the scheduled audio gets played and that there is no dead air. The person who is operating the board is also called a board op, or board operator. A promo is a short advertisement for something, often a show that will be airing later, a meeting relating to the station, or an upcoming community event. A spot or cart, a commercial or sweeper, it's a jingle to help brand the radio station. A spot is a broader term than promo. It doesn't have to be an announcement for something, just kind of an interstitial clip. But these terms are often used interchangeably. Promo, spot, and cart all refer to those little messages you hear between programs. Automation is a system used to automate programming, meaning it substitutes for a human board operator. An instant replay machine, or IR player, is a machine that stores promos or carts, also called a cart player. KBOO's IR player is called the Boo player. So if you hear us refer to the Boo player, we're referring to a computer in the air room that is used to store all of our carts. Pictured here on the right is our automation computer. We refer to it as Auto for short. So if you hear us referring to Auto, we are referring to our automation system. We use a software called Play It Live to run our automation. A run sheet is a document that lists what you are going to play and in what order. This is very useful for staying organized and planning your show. If you are not the board operator for your program, then it is essential that you have a run sheet for smoother communication between the host and the board op. A bed, or a music bed, is music or sound used in the background of an audio piece. Now we'll move on to some terms that are more specific to digital audio editing. Audio is recorded sound of any kind. Ambient noise, or background noise, is the sound picked up from the environment you are recording in. Potentially right now you might be able to hear some hums behind me. That is an example of ambient noise. It could be an appliance in the background, maybe your heater. And in some circumstances, if you're out at a parade, maybe people cheering in the background, that's an example of ambient noise. A clip is a continuous piece of audio. You can have multiple clips in one track, as pictured here. A track is a stream of recorded sound. So you can see there are 3 clips in this one track. A waveform is an image that represents an audio signal. It shows the change in amplitude over a given amount of time. The amplitude is the change in pressure from the peak of the waveform to the trough, which represents the loudness of an audio signal, and this is commonly measured in decibels. Audio distortion is the deviation or alteration of an audio signal's waveform. This can often be a hindrance in the recording process, but when done intentionally, it can be a useful tool. Clipping is a type of waveform distortion. Clipping occurs when something you are recording is too loud. In an audio editing software, you can see that the peaks of the waveform are cut off, hence the name clipping. Pops and clicks are another type of distortion caused by having the microphone too close to the mouth. It is especially prevalent on the letter P. Clicks occur when the microphone picks up the sounds made by the mouth, teeth, and tongue when you speak. To resolve clicks and pops, you want to move further away from your recording device and project your voice more. An input is any pathway through which an audio signal can go into a mixing desk, like a microphone. Outputs are any pathway through which an audio signal can be sent out of the computer or mixing desk. Those are like your speakers. Your levels are the volume at which a sound is coming through a mixing desk, indicated by the level on your display meter. Mono is sound intended to be heard as if it were emanating from one position. In a mono recording, the left and right speakers are playing the exact same streams of audio. A stereo recording is sound captured with two or more recording devices, used to create audible spatial depth. In a stereo recording, the left and right speakers are playing different streams of audio. Generally, mono is recommended for recording voices, so that's something we'll probably use quite often in radio. But if you are trying to record maybe a performance of multiple instruments, maybe you're creating radio theater, ASMR, anything that wants to create that audible depth, you'd want to use stereo for and use multiple recording devices. Now that we've covered some basic terminology, we can move on to the Audacity tutorial. This is going to be a very introductory overview of the Audacity workspace. We'll show you what all the buttons do, some basic effects, how to record in Audacity and import audio that was recorded elsewhere. We'll show you how to save your Audacity project and how that differs from a final export. Just to recap, Audacity is a free open source audio editing software. KBOO is currently using Audacity version 2.42 because our tech team had some concerns around Audacity's privacy policy change in 2021. We now know that this setting can be turned off in the later versions of Audacity, so KBOO will be updating this training very soon. You are welcome to download the latest version of Audacity at their website or follow the link on our handout to download this version. Hopefully the workspace of the latest version is not too far off from this one. So once you have Audacity downloaded, you can open up the application by double-clicking the icon on your desktop or typing it in your search bar. I personally like to keep it pinned in my taskbar. Every time you open Audacity, you'll get this pop-up that contains useful resources such as Audacity's wiki, their manual, and an online forum. The handout we provided is essentially an abridged version of some of these resources. Feel free to select the checkbox if you don't want to see this pop up each time you open the application. Otherwise, you can click OK. Now we can start the tour of the workspace, starting with how to import audio. Meaning you want to bring an audio file into the workspace that was recorded ahead of time on another device, such as your phone, a field recorder, or perhaps a Zoom meeting. There are two ways to import audio in Audacity. The first way to import audio is to go up to your File menu in the upper left-hand corner. Go down to Import and Audio. If you're not familiar with File Explorer, this is where you can locate and access any file on your computer. So we can select a file from our desktop, for example, or a flash drive, or in our libraries. Then we can select Open. The second way to import audio is to simply drag and drop. It is important to note that Audacity can only open certain file types, such as WAV, AIFF, PCM variants, and FLAC. If you wish to work with MP3s, M4As, and WMAs, you'll need to download a free plugin from Audacity's website. There is a link to the download and instructions on how to do so in the handout. I believe the latest version of Audacity is compatible with MP3s and doesn't require the additional plugin. So if you drag and drop an audio file into Audacity and nothing happens, it likely means that the file type you're trying to import is not compatible with Audacity. Before we start touring the workspace, first we're going to make sure that we know how to save and export a project properly. To save your Audacity project, we'll return to the File menu and scroll down to Save Project. For those of you who are less tech savvy, the difference between save and save as is that Save As will bring up a window asking you to name your project and decide where you want to put it on your computer. So you want to use Save As when you are saving your project for the very first time, or maybe you want to create a copy of your project and give it a new name. Save is used when you've already given your project a name and you just want to save your most recent changes to that existing project. Since this is a new project, we will select Save As. Before we move forward with saving our project, Audacity will warn us that saving a project is not the same as exporting. When you save in Audacity, the file produced is a .aup, which is an Audacity project file, meaning this file type can only be opened in the Audacity software. If you were to send a .aup file to a friend or submit this file for broadcast, no one would be able to play it. .aups are not compatible with media players or any other software besides Audacity. Audacity project files are designed only for editing purposes, for you to keep revisiting and saving until you're ready to finalize it. When you're done with your project and ready to share it or submit it for broadcast, that's when we'll export the file, which we'll cover next. So Audacity realizes this is a common misconception and has made a point to warn you each time. Feel free to select the checkbox if you don't want to see this pop up again, or you can just select OK. Now that we have made it to the Save As window, we'll need to give our project a name and decide where we want the file to be stored on our computer. When you download Audacity, it will automatically create a folder within your Documents folder called Audacity. This is a great place to store all your Audacity projects. On a Windows computer, your Documents folder lives within your libraries. So you'll go from Libraries to your Documents to Audacity. On a Mac, you should be able to find your Documents folder when you open up Finder. For this example, we'll save our project to the desktop. And you'll always want to give it a clear, identifiable name. And here you'll notice that the file type is a .aup. We'll go ahead and click Save. And now we'll head to the desktop to see what a .aup project file looks like. You'll see that Audacity created two files. We have a project file and a project data folder. Simply click the project file to return to your project. You will need to keep these two components together for your saved work to stay intact. If you were to accidentally separate these two files or delete the data folder, you'll receive an error message when you attempt to reopen your project. Audacity is giving us this error message letting us know that it can't find the data folder. Therefore, all we have is this empty workspace. If you're able to locate the deleted file in your recycling bin and reunite the files, your Audacity project will be restored. And there we go, our project is intact again. To prevent that from happening, I recommend creating a new folder for each project you create by right-clicking anywhere on your desktop or in your File Explorer. Scroll down to New and then Folder. Give the folder the same name as your Audacity project. Then we'll drag and drop these two files here into that folder. Now you can easily keep these two files together. When you're done editing and you're ready to submit your audio piece for broadcast, you'll return to the File menu and select Export. KBOO's automation system accepts MP3, WAV, and FLAC. So you can select Export as an MP3, a WAV, or scroll down to Export Audio if you don't see the file type you're looking for. Here we can choose from the drop-down whichever file type we want. I'm going to select FLAC. Now we'll give our final export a name and choose where to store it on our computer. I'm going to keep the name we have here, and I'm also going to save it to the desktop. We'll get another pop-up warning here letting us know that we are exporting and not saving the project this time. So we'll click OK. This window here is your metadata. It is optional to address this window, so for now we'll just click OK. If we minimize our workspace here, we can see that our project has been mixed down and exported into a media file. So if we double-click it, it will open in our computer's default media player. And it's now playable when you share it. To keep things tidy, I like to move my final export into my project folder. So I have everything together, the project, the data, and the final export. If you are ever confused about which file type you are looking at, you can always look at the icon. The Audacity logo means it's a .aup. If you hover your mouse on top of the file, you can see it says Type Audacity. Depending on your settings, you can also see under the Type column, it says Audacity Project File. For your final export, the icon will appear as your computer's default media player. Mine is Grooves, so I see the Grooves icon. And when you hover your mouse on top of the file, you'll see item type is a FLAC, as well as down in the type column. To recap, make sure you're submitting the exported file for broadcast and not the .aup. Otherwise, your show physically won't be able to broadcast. Now that we know how to import audio from external sources, we can now look at how to record audio directly in Audacity. Before we begin recording, we'll need to check our recording settings, starting with the Devices toolbar. The drop-down menu to the right of the microphone icon is your input. Select the drop-down arrow to choose which device you want to record from. If you have a USB microphone, for example, you'll want to locate that device in your drop-down. I'm currently recording through an interface, so that is the device you see selected here. If you don't see your external microphone in the drop-down menu, and down to Rescan Audio Devices. That will update your drop-down menu list. To the right of the speaker icon, you'll find your output selection. Choose which device you want to hear from when you play back your project. If your computer has built-in speakers, those will be selected by default. The last setting to address before you begin recording is your channel settings. This is where you can choose to record in mono or stereo. Remember, mono is commonly used to record voices. Other toolbars to be aware of before you begin recording are your mixer and meter toolbars. This monitor here displays your input levels. As you can see, it says click to start monitoring. To adjust your recording levels, you'll want to move this slider. And you can click again to turn off the monitoring. When you click the record button, your meter will automatically become active. Now we're ready to start recording. The transport toolbar is fairly intuitive, like that of a tape recorder or a DVD player. Each time you plan to record, double check that your cursor is where you want it to be on the timeline and that you are in the proper channel settings. But for this example, we want to see what Audacity does when we're in a brand new workspace, so I'm going to delete this track. So for this example, there are no existing tracks in our workspace. We can simply click Record. And Audacity will create a channel that matches my channel settings. You can click the pause button to temporarily pause your recording, without breaking it into multiple clips. So maybe you need to cough really quick, you can hit the pause button to resume, and you still have a continuous piece of audio. When you're done with that recording, you can go ahead and click stop. This button here will move your cursor back to 0 on your timeline. This button skips your cursor to the end of the last clip on your timeline. So those buttons are convenient for quick navigation of your workspace, especially for lengthy pieces. Lastly, we have the playback button. Again, make sure your cursor is where you want it on the timeline and click play to hear your project. You'll notice that the playback meter will become active when you are listening back to your project. To control the volume of your playback, you'll move the slider next to the speaker icon. This slider is connected to your computer's output settings, so you can also control your playback volume by selecting the volume speakers on your keyboard. This slider control does not affect your final export. Another tool in your editor's toolbox is the Play at Speed bar. This slider allows you to slow down or speed up the playback audio in your project. This affects the pitch as well. This slider also does not affect your final export. Both of these are just settings and resources for the editor. So for example, we can highlight a section, choose our speed, and hit play. And you'll see that it skews the pitch as well. So we learned how to record in a new workspace, but now that we have an existing track, how do we add another track? To create a new track in Audacity, go to the Track menu. Then go down to Add New, and choose Mono or Stereo. As always, before you begin recording, make sure that your channel setting matches the channel you are recording in. If my channel setting is still set to mono, but I plan to record in stereo, even if I put my cursor here and hit record, Audacity will jump to a nearby mono track to match the settings. Now we know all the primary functions of recording in Audacity. Now we can look at our Tools toolbar. Your most frequently used tool will be the Selection tool. It's very intuitive and functions just like your basic word processor. You can click around the page to move your cursor. You can click and drag to highlight a specific section, or even click and hold down your Shift key and click elsewhere on your page, and it will highlight the section between those points. You can use the Selection tool to listen back to a specific section. If you hold down the Shift key, it will play it in a loop. This might be helpful if you're trying to catch something in your audio that might be difficult to identify. Next, we have the Envelope tool. The Envelope tool allows you to make smooth volume changes over the length of a track through control points. So all you have to do is choose where you want your anchors to go. And then select how you want to change the amplitude by pinching down those anchors. So this is an easy way to fluctuate amplitude over a given amount of time. I'm going to click Ctrl-Z to undo our anchor points. Next, we have the Draw Sample tool. The Draw Sample tool is pretty advanced, so I'm not going to get into it today, but this tool allows you to manually redraw a waveform. It can be used to make volume changes to individual samples or to repair click noises. If you want to learn more about the Draw Sample tool, there are some resources linked in the digital packet. Next, we have the Zoom tool. Everything that the Zoom tool does can also be done through the Zoom toolbar. It's completely up to you whichever method works best for your workflow. Wherever you click the Zoom tool, it will zoom in by one step. If you right-click, you'll zoom out by one step. You can also zoom out by one step by holding the Shift key and doing your regular left click. You'll see that the magnifying glass icon will turn into a minus. Clicking and dragging will allow you to choose a specific frame to zoom into. The Zoom tool only zooms in widthwise. To change the zoom vertically, you can put your cursor on the edge of any track and drag up or down to make it taller or shorter. The time shift tool is the second most frequently used tool. It allows you to move clips along the timeline or to different tracks by clicking and dragging. It's important to note that you can only move a mono to a mono track and a stereo to a stereo. To convert a mono to a stereo, copy the mono track by clicking Select to highlight the whole track, go up to Edit and Duplicate. And now you have two mono tracks. You'll want to move them together by clicking and dragging. Then hold down your Control key and hit Select, so you have both of them highlighted. Go to the Track Panel menu and down to Make Stereo Track. Now we can take the Time Shift tool and move these clips down to the next stereo track. To convert a stereo to mono, simply go to the Tracks Panel menu and click Split Stereo to Mono. Before we move on to the last tool on this toolbar, I'm going to drop in some new audio tracks for us to play with. Lastly, we have the multi-tool, which combines all the other 5 tools. Depending on where you place your cursor on your waveform, the icon will change. When your cursor is just about anywhere within your clip, it will be the selection tool. When your cursor is on the outer edges of a clip or on that inner line, it will turn into the envelope tool. I'm going to hit Control Z. To summon the Draw Sample tool, you just need to zoom in far enough to where you can see the individual samples, and you'll see the pencil icon will appear. To zoom in, right-click and drag, and right-click to zoom out. Hold down the Control or Command key to click and drag clips with the Time Shift tool. So that's how to use all 5 tools in one. Again, use whatever pathway works best for you. There's always several different ways to do any one thing in Audacity. But if you can get the hang of the multi-tool, it can speed up your workflow. Lastly, we can go on to the Edit toolbar. Here we have Cut, Copy, and Paste. Also very reminiscent of your standard word processor, like Word or Google Docs. To cut or copy, just highlight a section, and in this case, we'll do Copy. Put your cursor where you want your paste to go and hit Paste. Cut works exactly the same, except you are removing it instead of duplicating it. So we're going to highlight this section, hit Cut, and we'll paste that clip over here. You can also use the keyboard commands Control X for cut, Control C for copy, and Control V for paste. Next, we have the Trim Audio button. It deletes all audio in a clip except the selection. I'm going to click Control Z, or we can jump ahead here and use our Undo button as well. As you can see, the keyboard command is presented there, so Control Z or the Undo button works just fine. You can also go up to your Edit menu, and Undo is right here as well as the keyboard shortcut. Control Y is for Redo. This next button here is kind of the opposite of the Trim Audio button. It silences the selection we have highlighted. Lastly, we have our magnifying glass toolbar. We have your standard zoom in and zoom out, so you just simply click the button and it'll zoom in by 1 step. or zoom out by one step. I find these other two buttons very handy. This button is Fit Selection to Width, so you highlight what section you want to see in detail and hit Fit Selection to Width, and it'll take the edges of your highlight and take it to the edges of your screen. The last button we have is Fit Project to Width. This is a very useful reset. You click this and you can see everything in your project from the start of the timeline to the very last clip on your timeline. And the last button here is your zoom toggle. This tool is somewhat advanced, but it allows you to zoom in between two presets that you can change in your track preferences. The default is set to zoom in to 4 pixels per sample. Now that you're acquainted with all the toolbars, we can look at customizing the layout of your workspace to match your needs. On the left-hand side of every toolbar, there is a grabber. If you click and drag, you can move any toolbar where it is convenient for you. The mixer and meter toolbars have a resizer on the right-hand side. This can be useful if you want to have a more precise control of your sliders or view of your meters. To reset your workspace to the default, go to View, Toolbars, and Reset Toolbars. I personally like to have my meters down here so I can extend them and get a precise reading of my levels. Now we can move on to the audio tracks. Each track contains a track control panel, a vertical scale measured in decibels, and a visual representation of the waveform. Each track is usually designated to one element in your project, like one person's voice or one instrument. When you're done with your project and you export, all of these tracks in your project will be mixed down to create your final audio file. So first, let's look at the features of the control panel. The X in the upper left-hand corner will delete a track. The mute button will silence or audibly hide this one track. That can be helpful if you're editing another track that exists at the same time on the timeline. The solo button does the opposite. It'll silence everything else in your project but this one given track. The gain slider allows you to raise the loudness of an entire track. There are other ways to change loudness, which we'll look at when we cover a few basic effects in a moment. Just note that if you use the gain slider, that any clip added to this track will be affected by it. The pan slider you probably won't use too often for our purposes, but it allows you to change the balance between the left and right channel. This tool might be relevant to you if you were creating radio theater, ASMR, where you want to manipulate your audio positioning to make a person or event sound like it's emanating from a certain location in proximity to your listener. This little arrow here allows you to collapse a track. If you have a lot of tracks in your project, it can be helpful to declutter your project space. You can click that same arrow again to restore the full length. As you saw before, the select button allows you to select an entire track. If you hold down the Control or Command key, you can select multiple tracks at once. If you want to select your entire workspace, you can use the keyboard command Control-A. You can also do the same by going up to your Select menu and All. You can see the keyboard command is listed here on the right. The last thing to look at on your track panel is your track panel dropdown. The first option here is to rename your track. This option is strictly for your organizational purposes. You can give it a name that's easy for you to identify for a quick and easy reference. These next 4 options allow you to move your track up and down vertically in your workspace. You can also move tracks by clicking the empty space in the track panel and dragging. The next 3 options allow you to change the way the waveform is displayed. It's fairly advanced, so we won't worry about that for now. Wave color is also just to help the editor stay organized. I can change Anchor 1's waveform to Instrument 2. And now I can quickly locate where that track is in my visual workspace. So those are the basic panel menu items that we'll worry about for today. Now let's look at the track menu. We already know how to add a new track, and many items in this menu can be done within the individual track panel menus. Align tracks is a menu item I find very handy when working with lots of tracks. It allows you to quickly arrange the order of your tracks on the timeline. To use align tracks, first we need to select the tracks you want to align. Since I want to align all my tracks, I'm going to click Ctrl-A on my keyboard. Then we'll go up to the track menu and select Align Tracks. And then we'll select Align End-to-End. End-to-End staggers the tracks in order from top to bottom. Sort Tracks is another tool used for your organization. It changes the vertical order of the tracks by name or start time. So you can select your desired tracks, then go to Tracks, Sort By, and choose name or start time. Now we're going to touch on a few basic effects that can be applied to your tracks. To apply any effect, you'll need to have a track or portion of a track selected. We'll start with the Amplify effect. Amplify allows you to raise the volume of a selection. To locate your effects, you'll go to your Effects menu. In the Amplify window, you can use the slider or type a number in the amplification box. This is the amount of decibels you are increasing or decreasing by. You can click the Preview button to hear an audible preview of what that effect will sound like. I personally like to use the new peak amplitude field as a reference for how loud to make the clip. By default, the new peak amplitude is set to 0, meaning the waveform's volume will be increased as high as it can go without the peaks of the waveform getting cut off. If you select this checkbox here, it will allow you to increase the amplitude past the limit. More often than not, I'm usually satisfied with having a new peak volume of 0, so I'm going to hit OK. The next effect we'll look at is Fade In and Fade Out. The next effect we'll look at is Fade In and Fade Out. If you have a piece of audio that begins or ends abruptly, you may want to soften the transition by fading in. To fade a piece of audio, you'll first want to decide how long you want the fade to be. If I want a short fade, I'll just highlight maybe a couple seconds. If I want a long and gradual fade, maybe I'll go a little further down the clip. Then we'll go to the Effects menu and down to Fade In. The Fade In effect takes the selected audio from 0 decibels to the original amplitude. The speed at which the audio will fade is determined by the length of your selection. Fade Out works exactly the same way, but in reverse. It takes the selected audio from the original amplitude down to 0 decibels over the duration of your selection. If you want more control over your fade, you can select the adjustable fade option in the Effects menu. You can choose the shape of the fade and several other advanced options. The last effect we'll look at today is the reverse effect. The reverse tool is one way to censor an indecent word in a song. It's less jarring than a bleep sound, and it keeps the beat in place for the most part. So I'll drop in this song as an example of how to censor an indecent word with the reverse effect. So we'll locate the indecent word and isolate it to the best we can with our selection tool. Then we'll go back up to the Effects menu and select Reverse. And now our waveform is completely flipped. And let's give it a listen. And that's it for today's class. In our next session, we'll look at how to apply the different effects and resources we just learned when we're putting together a pre-recorded show for broadcast.